December 21st, 1944, Malmedy, Belgium. 4 days after the massacre at Baugny, American soldiers on this sector no longer had to guess what capture by Kampfgruppe Peiper might mean. They already knew. So, when German armor began grinding toward the bridge line near Malmedy before dawn, this was not just another local attack in the Ardennes. It was a test of nerves against one of the most feared spearheads in Hitler's winter offensive, led by men whose reputation had already spread ahead of their tanks. And in the path of that advance stood a 19-year-old private first class from Company K, 120th Infantry, 30th Infantry Division, Francis Sherman Currey. The bridge mattered because the flank mattered. Currey's platoon was part of a strong point guarding a vulnerable approach near Malmedy on December 21st, during the most dangerous days of the Battle of the Bulge. German tanks had already overrun nearby anti-tank positions. American defenders were being pushed back toward a factory. In the usual version of this story, that is where the legend begins. A kid grabs a bazooka, fires into steel, and somehow stops a column. But that is not really the heart of it. The heart of it is pressure. Currey was not a tank commander, not a colonel, not even an NCO at the time of the action. He was a rifleman in a collapsing position, facing armor, infantry, artillery, and the knowledge that a Waffen SS breakthrough here could roll up the battalion's exposed flank. That is why the opening minutes matter so much. This was not a clean duel between one brave American and one dramatic German tank. It was chaos, a withdrawal under fire, tanks coming through, infantry closing in, American crews already overrun, and a young soldier shifting from weapon to weapon, because there was no time left for anything else. Currey found a bazooka in the factory, crossed open ground to get rockets under small arms, machine gun, artillery, and tank fire, then helped knock out a tank. He moved again, killed or wounded Germans in the doorway of an enemy-held house, blasted part of the wall with rockets, grabbed anti-tank grenades from a vehicle under heavy fire, drove tank crews from their vehicles, climbed onto a half-track in plain view of the enemy, and used machine guns to help 5 trapped Americans escape. Strip away the later mythology, and the scene becomes even more impressive. Not a superhuman fantasy, but a chain of split-second decisions made by someone too junior to be expected to hold that much of the burden. And that is the real question this story hangs on. How does a 19-year-old private end up becoming the hinge on which a local sector turns? Because Currey did not arrive in Belgium as a finished war hero. He arrived the way many of them did, young, capable, underranked, and thrown into a battlefield that aged men by the week. To understand why he fought the way he did outside Malmedy, you have to go back before the tanks, before the snow, and before the Waffen SS reached his line. Subscribe now for more war stories where one decision, one road, and one man under pressure changed far more than anyone around him realized. Francis Sherman Currey was born on June 29, 1925, in Loch Sheldrake, New York. His father died when he was young, his mother died when he was still a boy, and he grew up with foster parents in nearby Hurleyville. That background does not automatically create a hero. War documentaries love that trick, turning hardship into destiny. Reality is rougher and less poetic. What it did create was a young man used to instability, used to adapting, and used to carrying weight early. He enlisted at 17, entered the Army, and showed enough promise to move into training pipelines that suggested he was more than just another body for a rifle company. But World War II, in 1944, had a brutal habit of flattening promise into necessity. The infantry in Europe was bleeding. Programs were cut. Men who might have become engineers, specialists, or officers were turned back into replacements for frontline units, because the line needed bodies more than futures. That matters because Currey's performance near Malmedy was not luck. It came from training and adaptability. By the time he joined the 30th Infantry Division in Europe, he had learned to handle a wide range of infantry weapons. On December 21st, that knowledge became survival. Most men can be brave once. Far fewer can stay functional while switching roles in seconds. Automatic rifleman, anti-tank gunner, grenadier, machine gunner, rescuer. The Medal of Honor citation makes that clear without theatrical language. Currey kept moving, kept rearming, kept crossing exposed ground, and kept taking on tasks usually spread across several men and weapons crews. That is one reason his action is so easy to flatten into myth. It sounds almost too compact, too relentless, too complete. But the citation is precise for a reason. What made him so dangerous that morning was not just courage, it was competence under extreme pressure. Across the road from him was not a random German patrol. The broader threat came from the Ardennes Offensive and from formations tied to 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, SS Adolf Hitler, including Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armored spearhead that had already become infamous after the murder of American prisoners near Malmedy on December 17th. By the time Currey faced German armor on the 21st, the atmosphere had changed. Fear was no longer abstract. Surrender was no longer a reassuring fallback in the minds of many American soldiers on that front. That emotional backdrop does not reduce Currey's action, it sharpens it. He was not merely defending ground. He was fighting inside a psychological climate poisoned by massacre, rumor, and the very real possibility that a breakthrough here would mean encirclement for his battalion and death for men who could not get out. So by the time the firing started outside Malmedy, Currey was carrying more than a BAR and later a bazooka. He was carrying the pressure of a battlefield where command decisions, operational objectives, and war crime terror were all collapsing onto one frozen stretch of road. And once the first tank came through, all of that pressure focused on one problem. If he did not stop the momentum there, the Germans would not simply keep driving. They would open the battalion's side and turn a bad morning into a disaster. What happened next is why the story survived. The German attack had already forced American anti-tank assets back. Currey's group withdrew toward a nearby factory. That alone tells you the situation was ugly. This was not a proud stand from prepared strength. It was a position being cracked open by armor and infantry. Currey secured a bazooka and crossed the street to get rockets while enemy fire lashed the area. With a companion, he knocked out a tank. Then he shifted again, spotted Germans in the doorway of a hostile house, and hit them with his automatic rifle. He advanced alone to within about 50 yards of that house and fired a rocket that tore down part of a wall. Then, seeing 5 trapped Americans pinned for hours by fire from the house and 3 tanks, he crossed the street again, collected anti-tank grenades, and drove tank crews from their vehicles under heavy fire. He climbed onto a half-track in full view of the enemy and fired into the house. He changed positions again and manned another machine gun whose crew had been killed. Only then were the trapped Americans able to get out. That sequence is the spine of the entire episode, not because it is flashy, but because it exposes the deeper truth of combat reputation. German armored formations looked terrifying from a distance, and often were, but momentum is fragile. Armored thrusts rely on speed, shock, road discipline, confidence, and the assumption that resistance ahead is either weak or already collapsing. Currey attacked that psychology as much as he attacked vehicles. Every time he reappeared from another angle with another weapon, he multiplied uncertainty. Every time a tank crew bailed out or infantry took casualties, the image of a smooth armored push cracked a little more. The defenders did not need to destroy an entire brigade for the local effect to matter. They needed to make the Germans hesitate, stall, and misread what they were hitting. That is exactly what happened. The enemy was forced to withdraw after losing men, vehicles, and the initiative in that sector. This is where a weaker documentary usually overplays the claim and says Currey single-handedly destroyed Hitler's most feared SS brigade. That line is great for packaging, but history needs a cleaner blade. Currey did not annihilate the 1st SS Panzer Division. He did something more believable and, in a way, more interesting. He was greatly responsible for breaking one attack that threatened his battalion's flank, rescuing 5 comrades, and inflicting enough confusion and damage to help stop a dangerous local thrust. The Medal of Honor citation says exactly that. The distinction matters because accuracy does not weaken the story. It restores the real scale of what one soldier can do in the right, or wrong, 2 hours. And still, even the corrected version remains savage in its implications. A teenager, in winter, under tank and machine gun fire, became the man other soldiers later remembered because he kept doing the thing that should have killed him. Then he did it again. Then again. The armored column did not meet a grand American counterstroke at that point. It met a local defense that refused to behave like a beaten defense. At the center of that refusal was Currey, and once you see the action that way, a second question opens up. Why did one local stand matter enough that people later talked about it as something larger than a mere skirmish? The answer lies in what local actions do during a major offensive. The Battle of the Bulge is often told through giant arrows on maps, fuel shortages, famous towns, and the names of senior commanders. But offensives do not live or die on map arrows alone. They live on roads, bridges, choke points, flanks, delays, and the morale balance between attackers who need momentum and defenders who need just enough stubbornness to break it. Currey's fight near Malmedy was one of those moments where the larger war briefly passed through a very small opening. If the Germans had opened that flank cleanly and quickly, the local American position would have become harder to hold, and pressure on adjacent units would have increased. No single local action wins the Bulge by itself. That kind of slogan belongs on posters, not in serious history. But enough local actions can absolutely ruin an offensive's timing. That is how big operations die, not always in one dramatic collapse, but in accumulating friction. There is also a darker reframing here. Currey's fame came later. In the moment, he was absorbing a burden created by decisions far above him. Hitler launched a winter offensive built on surprise and unrealistic operational ambition. German armored spearheads pushed through terrain and logistics that could punish delay. American units on the line had to hold, improvise, and buy time under immense pressure. So, when we call Currey a hero, we should also hear the accusation buried inside the word. He had to become one because systems were colliding around him. A private ended up filling the space where certainty had broken down, where artillery, anti-tank defense, command timing, and battlefield control had all become too fragile to guarantee the outcome on their own. That may be the most overlooked part of the story. Currey is often remembered as a fearless kid who took on tanks. True. But the hidden factor is that his action was also a refusal to let fear complete the German plan at the local level. After Bognyes, fear was not weakness. It was rational. The Waffen SS had already shown what could happen to prisoners. Yet fear cut both ways. Once Currey started breaking vehicles, smashing fire positions, and rescuing trapped men, the attackers had to feel something corrosive too. Uncertainty. How large is the force ahead? How organized is this defense? How much more trouble waits around the next building? In armored combat, that moment of doubt is poison. Currey did not need to destroy everything in front of him. He needed to destroy the attack's confidence. That is what makes this story bigger than one teenager with nerve. It is a story about momentum being murdered in public. And once the attack failed there, Currey's local stand became part of a broader Allied pattern in the Ardennes. Enough resistance, in enough places, by enough exhausted units, to turn Hitler's last big gamble into a hemorrhage he could not stop. Which means the final payoff is not just that Currey survived or received a medal, it is that his 2 hours near Malmedy belonged to the exact kind of battlefield friction that made the offensive bleed out. Currey survived the war, but the war did not stop testing him after December 21st. During the Ardennes fighting, and after it, he continued to serve with distinction. He later received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and Purple Hearts, and by the end of the war, his highest rank was Technical Sergeant. On July 27, 1945, Major General Leland S. Hobbs presented him the Medal of Honor at Reims, France. The formal citation did not try to invent mythology. It stated the essentials. Near Malmedy, Currey repeatedly crossed exposed ground under murderous fire, destroyed or neutralized enemy armor, inflicted casualties, rescued 5 comrades, 2 of them wounded, and helped stem an attack threatening his battalion's flank. That citation is unusually useful because it resists the temptation to turn him into a comic book figure. It preserves the thing that matters most. He did enough, in the right place, under the worst pressure, to change the immediate battle around him. What happened to his reputation afterward says something about memory. Currey was one of the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipients when he died in 2019 at age 94. He was honored, respected, and certainly not forgotten by military historians. But he never became the kind of household name attached to broader cultural mythology in the way some war heroes did. That is partly because his kind of heroism is hard to dramatize honestly. It is messy. It involves weapon changes, road crossings, partial withdrawals, pinned men, local terrain, and terrifyingly practical choices. Hollywood prefers cleaner symbolism. History gives you Currey instead, the orphaned New York farm kid who was judged too young for one path, pushed into another, and then, near Malmedy, forced into a role no 19-year-old should ever have needed to play. And that brings us back to the opening promise. The deeper truth in this story is not that one kid wrecked an SS formation all by himself in some cartoon version of the war. The deeper truth is harsher and better. A teenage American private hit one dangerous German attack at the exact point where shock had to be preserved, and he kept hitting it until the attack lost momentum, lost nerve, and lost the ground it needed. That is how major offensives are damaged in reality, not only by famous commanders and giant formations, but by one stubborn defender at the wrong bridge, on the wrong morning, refusing to disappear. So if you want the cleanest final line, it is this. Francis Sherman Currey did not need to destroy an entire brigade to wreck what mattered most in front of him. He wrecked its certainty. He wrecked its tempo. He wrecked the assumption that the Americans ahead were finished. And on December 21st, 1944, near Malmedy, that was enough to make a 19-year-old private the most dangerous man on that road.